Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. The hidden habit. Most people go through their daily lives unaware of a subtle yet powerful behavior that quietly governs their relationships. It is not loud or violent, nor does it always appear toxic at first glance. In fact, it often hides beneath the mask of politeness and good manners. This behavior is the compulsion to explain oneself, constantly, repeatedly, often unnecessarily. At first sight, it can look harmless. After all, what could be wrong with giving reasons for your decisions, clarifying your emotions, or apologizing for being unavailable? Isn't it simply a sign of empathy, a way of showing consideration for those around you? Yet beneath this seemingly benign habit lies something much deeper, and far more troubling. It is not a reflection of politeness but of pain. It is not empathy but evidence of an old wound, poorly healed and never truly acknowledged. Carl Gustav Jung, one of the great names of analytical psychology, warned of this pattern. To him, the compulsive need to justify who you are, why you feel, or how you act reveals a painful disconnection from the self. Each explanation, though delivered outwardly to others, is in truth a silent inner cry. Am I allowed to exist? The roots of this behavior are not found in adulthood but in childhood. It grows in environments marked by emotional invalidation, families, schools, or cultural settings where a child's inner world is dismissed. Imagine a child expressing sadness, only to be told, "You're exaggerating." A child voicing anger, silenced with, "Don't be so disrespectful." Or a child revealing fear, mocked with laughter or disdain. Each of these dismissals plants a cruel message: what I feel only matters if others approve of it. Over time, this belief becomes an invisible prison, so subtle that even the prisoner cannot see its walls. By the time that child becomes an adult, the behavior is firmly entrenched. The grown individual explains every absence, softens every emotion, rationalizes every choice. They believe that by doing so, they can avoid rejection, criticism, or abandonment. If they can make others understand, perhaps they will not be judged too harshly. Perhaps they will be accepted, loved, or at least tolerated. This is not simply an act of communication. It is an act of survival. But survival, when it comes at the cost of freedom, exacts a high price. The person who constantly explains begins to neglect their inner authority. They no longer act out of conviction, but out of fear of misunderstanding. They no longer feel their emotions fully, but dissect them into rational justifications to avoid disapproval. Slowly, they stop living for themselves and begin performing for others. Their life becomes an eternal theater, where the audience holds more power than the protagonist. Jung understood this compulsion as a serious obstacle on the path to individuation, the psychological process by which a person becomes their truest self. Individuation requires freedom, but compulsive self-explanation is a form of subtle submission. Each justification is not just a statement, it is a plea. It is as if, with every explanation, the individual whispers, "I can only exist if you allow it." The tragedy of this habit is that most people mistake it for kindness. They think they are being considerate, when in truth they are chained by fear. They think they are showing empathy, when in fact they are betraying their own authority. What looks like courtesy on the surface is, at its root, a silent struggle against the terror of being rejected for who they are. And so, the compulsion persists. It shapes conversations, decisions, even the way people experience their own emotions. Someone feels sadness but explains it away as tiredness. They feel anger but dress it in reason so as not to seem immature. They feel joy but downplay it, afraid others might find it excessive. In every case, their inner truth is edited, revised, trimmed to make it acceptable for others. This is the hidden habit, the invisible behavior that dominates far more lives than most would ever guess. It is not simply about words but about existence itself. To explain oneself constantly is to beg for the right to occupy space in the world. It is to live as if your value is always on trial, dependent on the verdict of others. And as Jung warned, as long as this pattern persists, there can be no true inner freedom. The first step to breaking the cycle is recognizing it for what it is. Not politeness. Not empathy. But submission disguised as courtesy. Once this recognition dawns, the journey toward reclaiming one's internal authority can begin. But until then, the silent prison remains. The prison of validation. The habit of compulsive self-explanation is rarely seen for what it truly is, a prison. It does not announce itself with chains or bars, yet it confines the individual as surely as iron walls. On the surface, the explanations look harmless, even thoughtful. But underneath, they reveal a life lived for others' approval, not one's own truth. When a person explains themselves repeatedly, their focus shifts away from inner conviction. Instead of acting from their own center, they act with the constant fear of being misunderstood. They do not make choices because they believe in them, but because they hope those choices will be acceptable in the eyes of others. This erodes autonomy in subtle but devastating ways. The problem grows worse when emotions are filtered through the need for validation. Sadness is rationalized, anger softened, joy restrained. Each feeling is reshaped into something more digestible for the external audience. Over time, emotions lose their raw authenticity, becoming rehearsed lines in a play. The individual is no longer fully present in their own inner life, they are curating an image, carefully edited, always cautious. Jung recognized this as one of the greatest obstacles to individuation, the process by which a human being becomes truly themselves. For him, individuation was not about perfection but wholeness, embracing one's contradictions, emotions, and truths without apology. But how can someone reach wholeness if they are trapped in an endless cycle of justification? As long as every feeling must be defended, the individual never stands freely in their own truth. They are always waiting for someone else's verdict before claiming their existence. This is why Jung considered compulsive explanation a sophisticated form of submission. Every justification is not just a reason, it is a hidden contract. It says, I am willing to betray my truth if it ensures you won't reject me. In essence, it places the keys to one's worth in the hands of others. The roots of this pattern are often planted in childhood, where emotional invalidation becomes routine. Picture a child who cries and is told, stop being dramatic. A child who voices anger and is silenced, don't talk back. A child who expresses fear and is mocked, don't be such a coward. With each dismissal, the child receives a clear, brutal message, your feelings are not enough on their own. They only matter if others accept them. From this soil grows the adult who explains everything. They apologize for being tired. They justify their boundaries. They defend their joy as if happiness requires permission. The compulsion becomes so ingrained that they no longer notice it. It feels natural, almost polite. But beneath the politeness lies fear, the fear of being criticized, abandoned, or excluded if they do not provide reasons. The cost of this constant performance is profound. By living for external validation, the individual abandons their own internal authority. Their center of gravity shifts outward, away from the self, toward the unpredictable opinions of others. This creates dependency. One smile lifts them, one criticism crushes them. Their worth rises and falls according to how well they explain themselves in the eyes of others. In truth, it is not freedom at all. It is survival through submission, dressed up as courtesy. The theater may look polished, the actor convincing, but the script is written by fear. The audience holds the power, and the protagonist, though standing center stage, has lost control of their own story. This is the invisible prison of validation. And like all prisons, it cannot be broken from the outside. It must be dismantled within. Jung's invitation was clear: the only way forward is to reclaim authority from the external gaze, to begin living not for explanation but for authenticity. Without this shift, the person remains a performer in their own life, forever seeking applause, never daring to walk off the stage and simply be. Self-betrayal and the ego's mask. When Jung spoke of compulsive self-explanation, he described it not only as a habit but as a form of betrayal. This betrayal is not loud or obvious. It does not come in a single dramatic act but in countless small concessions, repeated daily. Each one seems insignificant in isolation, but together they corrode the soul. It begins with little things. You laugh at a joke you don't find funny, because silence might make you seem cold. You say yes when you mean no, because refusal might make you seem selfish. You explain your sadness as tiredness, because you don't want to burden anyone. You disguise your anger as reason, fearing others will call you immature. Each of these moments looks harmless. But Jung insisted that every time you distort yourself to be accepted, you abandon a part of your truth. This is the essence of self-betrayal. It is not the dramatic denial of the self but the subtle daily erosion of it. Like water slowly hollowing stone, each act of justification wears away at the foundation of identity. Eventually, what remains is not a person standing firmly in their truth, but a mask, crafted carefully to please, to avoid conflict, to blend in. Jung explained that this happens when the ego, the center of consciousness, becomes enslaved to the external world. The ego should function as a bridge between the inner self and outer reality. But when it is captured by the need for approval, it stops serving the self and begins serving the audience. It reshapes itself constantly, adjusting to what others want to see. In doing so, it loses connection to the deeper self, the inner source of authenticity and wholeness. At first, society rewards this adaptation. People who explain themselves, who avoid conflict, who always make themselves understandable, are called considerate, easygoing, harmonious. They are praised as good friends, good colleagues, good partners. Yet the applause hides a darker truth. Behind this social harmony often lies exhaustion. For the individual who constantly adapts, life becomes a performance. They smile when they do not feel joy. They agree when they disagree. They soften their truths, repress their emotions, and rationalize their needs. On the outside, they look cooperative. On the inside, they feel drained. This exhaustion is not physical, it is emotional depletion, the cost of living out of alignment with oneself. Jung warned that this kind of fragmentation leads to neuroses. When the ego strays too far from the self, symptoms appear: chronic anxiety, existential emptiness, indecision, low self-esteem. These are not random afflictions but cries of the psyche demanding attention. The soul, silenced for too long, begins to shout through symptoms. It is not the body that is tired but the truth inside that has been denied too often. The danger of this betrayal is that it is socially invisible. People see the polite smiles, the careful explanations, the cooperative gestures, and assume all is well. In fact, they praise it. But deep within, the individual knows something is wrong. They feel a quiet hollowness, a subtle pain that grows sharper with every concession. And so, the question arises, whose life is it? When every decision is explained, every emotion justified, every boundary softened, can it still be called your life? Or has it become a story co-authored by others' expectations, a play in which you are no longer the writer but merely an actor repeating borrowed lines? This is why Jung called self-explanation a mask. The mask may look convincing, but behind it, the true face waits, unseen and unheard. To break the cycle requires courage, the courage to risk disapproval, the courage to stop explaining, the courage to live unmasked. For only when the mask is dropped does the true face finally breathe. The power of silence. There comes a moment when explanations no longer soothe but suffocate. Jung understood that the true antidote to compulsive justification is not louder words, but silence. And not just any silence, the silence that grows from integrity, from self-trust, from the refusal to place one's existence on trial. This silence is not emptiness but presence. It is not avoidance but authority. For those who have lived their whole lives explaining themselves, the decision to stop feels radical. It feels like rebellion. After all, the people around them are accustomed to constant clarifications, why you said no, why you didn't attend, why you feel a certain way. The first time you stop explaining, the absence of words feels shocking, even dangerous. But this very absence reveals something profound, the beginning of freedom. To manipulators, this silence is unbearable. They thrive on your explanations because explanations keep you tied to their judgment. Each justification gives them leverage. If they can argue with your reasons, they can control your actions. But when you stop explaining, their grip loosens. Silence becomes a stone wall, unmovable and uninterested in playing the game. For the manipulator, this is not just inconvenient, it is threatening. Yet silence is not only a weapon against manipulation, it is a filter. When you stop justifying, your relationships change. Those who valued you only because you were pliable, predictable, and easy to manage begin to fall away. At first, this can feel like loss. People may accuse you of arrogance, coldness, or selfishness. But what is actually happening is realignment. The silence reveals who is genuinely there for you and who was there only for control. This transition is not easy. Inside, anxiety rises. The old patterns beg to return. A voice says, just explain this once, it will calm the tension. That voice is the echo of childhood invalidation, the part of you that learned long ago that explanations equal safety. Resisting it feels like walking into fire. Yet Jung described this struggle as a necessary stage in individuation. To stop explaining is to walk through the desert of inner solitude, the space where external approval vanishes and only your own authority remains. The silence that emerges here is not passive. It does not mean withdrawal from dialogue or rejection of others. Rather, it means that you no longer beg for understanding. You offer your truth as a gift, not as a plea. This transforms communication. Instead of speaking to be approved, you speak to be authentic. Instead of rationalizing your emotions, you express them. The shift may seem subtle, but it changes everything. Conversations lose their performance quality, relationships become clearer, and your presence begins to carry weight. In practice, internal authority reveals itself through small daily acts of silence. Someone provokes you, and you choose not to defend yourself endlessly. A request feels wrong, and you simply say, "That doesn't resonate with me," without offering a long rationale. You end a conversation without apology, not from arrogance, but because you recognize that your presence needs no justification. Each of these moments is a declaration, "I exist without your permission." Jung called this the silent revolution. It is not rebellion in the form of shouts or protests, but rebellion in the form of absence. The absence of pleading. The absence of masks. The absence of self-betrayal. Silence here is not weakness, it is strength distilled. It is a refusal to dance for acceptance, a refusal to play a part in someone else's script. But perhaps the greatest power of silence lies not in how it changes others, but in how it changes you. Each time you resist the urge to explain, you affirm yourself. Each time you remain quiet in the face of pressure, you strengthen your inner authority. Slowly, silence stops being uncomfortable absence and becomes solid presence. It becomes not what you lack but what you emanate. And in that presence, everything begins to transform. Integrity and transformation. When the silence of integrity takes root, life itself begins to shift. Jung described this as one of the most profound transformations in the human psyche, the movement from living for explanation to living from truth. It is not simply behavioral, it is existential. The entire center of gravity of the psyche changes. Integrity is not arrogance, as some may claim. It is not coldness or rigidity. Integrity is coherence, the alignment between inner truth and outer expression. It is the refusal to fragment yourself to please others. It is the ability to feel something uncomfortable and still stand by it without needing to present evidence, arguments, or excuses. Integrity says, "This is what I feel, this is what I choose, this is who I am, and that is enough." In a world where most people live edited versions of themselves, this stance is revolutionary. To trust your emotions, to honor your intuition, to declare your boundaries without an accompanying essay, this is a radical act. It communicates, without words, that your existence is not negotiable. And strangely, this lack of negotiation does not repel respect, it attracts it. The less you seek approval, the more authority you emanate. People who embody integrity radiate something magnetic. They do not convince or beg to be understood. They simply express. Their words carry weight because they are rooted in truth, not in fear. When they speak, others listen, not because the words are perfect, but because they come from wholeness. Their silence carries as much power as their speech. Jung saw this psychological integrity as the mature fruit of individuation. It marks the transition from being a character in someone else's narrative to being the author of your own. The integrated person does not outsource their self-worth. They no longer measure their value through the eyes of others. Instead, they stand in their own center, grounded, unshakable, whole. The effects ripple outward. Relationships change. Those built on control, manipulation, or insecurity begin to crumble. People who once benefited from your constant explanations grow uncomfortable when you no longer justify yourself. Some distance themselves, but this is not loss, it is realignment. What remains are relationships built on mutual respect, honesty, and equality. Your silence becomes a filter, revealing who is truly with you and who only stayed because you were easy to bend. Professionally, integrity alters presence. The person who once second-guessed every decision, offering lengthy explanations for fear of criticism, now speaks with clarity. They no longer waste energy proving their competence, they embody it. Boundaries become firm yet calm. Negotiations shift, because when you stop justifying your worth, others begin to recognize it. Internally, the transformation is even greater. Anxiety begins to ease. The constant mental rehearsal of explanations, what will I say if they ask, how can I make them understand, fades away. Instead, the mind clears, making space for authentic listening. For the first time, you hear yourself fully. Emotions no longer need translation, they are felt directly. This deep listening creates peace. It also fuels creativity, because energy once spent on justification is now free for expression. The paradox is striking: the less you explain, the more whole you feel. And the more whole you feel, the more respect you naturally attract. The cycle of dependence breaks, replaced by a cycle of presence. This is not about becoming untouchable or aloof. It is about becoming real, so real that explanations are unnecessary. Of course, this integrity requires courage. Old habits resist fiercely. The impulse to justify yourself returns, especially in moments of doubt. But each time you resist, you strengthen your center. Each time you hold your silence, you reinforce your autonomy. Over time, this becomes not an effort but a way of being. Silence ceases to feel like absence, it becomes the most eloquent form of presence. Jung's teaching was clear: individuation is not about gaining perfection, but about embracing wholeness. And wholeness begins with refusing to betray yourself for acceptance. Once that betrayal ends, once integrity takes root, life transforms. You no longer live to be understood. You live to be true. And that truth carries a weight that changes everything: your relationships, your work, your inner peace, and the way the world responds to you.